This episode is brought to you by Rev1. Rev1's mission is to help entrepreneurs build great companies. As you navigate the waters of business entrepreneurship, you don't have to go it alone. A strategic partnership with Rev1 connects innovators to the talent, customers, space, and funding you need when you need it. Get started with Rev1 Startup Studio by visiting rev1ventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is rev1ventures.com. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Nationwide. Nationwide's mission is to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. To help fulfill that mission, Nationwide is looking to invest its $350 million venture capital investment fund in insurtechs that will help them create new and exciting products and solutions to meet the needs of their customers. If you're interested in partnering with Nationwide's venture capital team, visit nationwideventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is nationwideventures.com. Nationwide is on your side. 614 Startups Nation, welcome to another episode of the 614 Startups podcast. My name is Elio Harmon, your host, and guys, listen, there are two things guaranteed in this life, death and taxes. So why the hell did it take us so long to bring a tax lawyer on the show? Well, we got a special guest for you today, my man Brent Johnson of Clarus R D. Brent, welcome to the show.
Elio, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. It's about this time of year. Right, all year you're running your business, you're not thinking about taxes. I mean, maybe you are, but maybe you're putting off talking to somebody about it. So It's very appropriate to have you on towards the end of the year to talk about some tax-related things. But before we dig in too deep, why don't you share a bit of your personal and professional background, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Sure. I've been in the tax profession my entire career, which is getting a little long in the tooth at this point, but I started professionally at Deloitte, worked primarily in large corporate tax, worked with large taxpayers, moved on here locally and ran the tax department for Safelite, large local company, and then they helped me transition into entrepreneurship. Started my own tax practice here in Columbus. And just about 6-7 years ago started Clarus, which is focused on tax incentives, which is a very niche part of the tax law.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the big four, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It is.
So what is it like working in a big four accounting firm when it comes to what you are able to, the experience that you got there? How did that shape your outlook on taxes and how companies can, prepare to either pay or, I don't want to say avoid, but actually kind of maximize the incentives that are available to them? How did that experience help shape your view?
Yeah, sure. Working at a big firm is awesome. I mean, it is stimulating. It's interesting. You get to see all kinds of interesting transactions. You get a lot of really technical tax kind of issues. And those firms, really, they are so big. If you look at accounting firms across the board, the big four accounting firms are so much larger than the other players in the market. They have the resources and infrastructure necessary to invest in education, to invest in technical aspects, to do lobbying, to influence tax policy. And you learn a lot working at a large firm. One of the things that I learned that I've taken throughout my career is just the approach larger businesses take to tax planning. They actually have a tax plan.
Yeah.
They think through and they write down the different aspects of a tax plan. As I went out on my own after leaving Safelite, one of the first things I learned is, hey, small businesses don't have a tax plan generally. It's very reactive. Hey, it's late in the year. I'm thinking about taxes. What should I do? And so it's a little different approach.
Yeah, all right. So the big businesses work with the big four firms because their needs are more complex, or is it a kind of they lean towards the bigger firms because of relationships? I mean, what's the difference? Is it a resource issue that they just automatically need to go to the big four? Why do you think bigger firms are drawn to the big four versus maybe trusting a smaller company to kind of manage their transactions?
There's a lot of different reasons. Probably the most significant of which is, hey, public companies in particular. Hey, it matters who audits their financials, and the tax work tends to follow along. And so having that name at the bottom of your audit report is important.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how frequently they get started with large taxpayers. But it's also relationships. It's being involved in the community, and developing relationships with the business leaders. Those are the things that drive where businesses go for their professional advice.
Okay, so now the next step in your career, you're kind of working with these larger organizations. You go to SafeLight. Would you consider SafeLight a large company at the time you joined them, or prior to you leaving, or are they a mid-sized company? What would you say? And what was that experience working with a company of that size?
Oh gosh,
And working internal, right? Now you're actually an employee working
mhm.
for the company.
I loved my time at SafeFlight. I loved my time at Deloitte.
Mm-hmm.
It was stimulating, but it was a lot of work. And I'm married, I have 4 kids. I had 4 young kids at home. It didn't continue to fit as I got a little older. And SafeFlight was perfect. They were client. I knew the management team exceedingly well. I would say at the time they were more of a mid-sized business. When I joined SafeLight, they've grown exponentially since then. Um, and it was a great experience. It was my first time in a broader finance group. I wasn't just doing tax work. I got to do things like fleet. I got some responsibility to manage their fleet and insurance groups. So I learned a lot about how businesses work at my time at SafeLight. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Now, SafeLight is, and that's one of the things I love about Columbus. We have so many very interesting companies that whether or not you decide to be an entrepreneur or you decide to work
Hmm.
for one of the more established firms here, your time there can really shape you and prepare you to go out on your own. So, what were some of your lessons learned that you say, hey man, that really kind of impacted me, or I've benefited from that now that I'm an entrepreneur? Because a lot of younger people in particular, they want to jump in and start a startup right out of the gate. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's worth your time to go work for a company first. So, what are your thoughts on that in terms of some of the things that you learned that kind of sharpened the sword and prepared you to be an entrepreneur?
Um, yeah, the importance of relationships. The SafeLight CEO at the time is continued. He's an investor in Clarus, so developing those relationships and those people help you as you go down the road and you experience um, difficult circumstances, you experience challenges, you can lean on those relationships. And what I really learned at SafeLight was how business works. At Deloitte, I learned about tax policy and theory. I learned about working inside of a finance group. At SafeLight, I learned a lot about how a business operates. And the management team there was awesome, exposing me and others within the management team to different parts of the operation. And so I really got to see how things work and how things sometimes don't work.
Right,
Hmm.
right. And it's interesting to get a look behind the curtain because perception doesn't always match reality of how messy it is in
Hmm.
running a business, no matter the size, right? Mistakes are being made, continuous improvement. You're seeing all of the different business challenges. You see what it takes when there's a policy shift or a trend in the market, and you see how your company responds. So I'm a big proponent of that,
Hmm.
right? I own a company, but I still work in a company.
Hmm.
And it really helps sharpen me. You learn how to work with other people, you learn how to lead teams, all of the things that you're going to need to be a successful entrepreneur.
Yes.
exits matter. How you leave matters. So you're working for this company, great relationships. How do you position your exit in a way that the CEO of the company ultimately becomes an investor? How did you transition to first your firm and then to Clarus?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a conversation. I would consider the CFO at Safelite at the time, Doug Heron, is a great guy, he's a friend. The CEO at the time was Dan Wilson, great guy, is a friend. And it was just an honest conversation that said, hey, I think I have an opportunity to start a tax practice. I don't want to leave Safelite in the lurch. Hey, I'd like to work with Safelite as I go through this transition. And Safelite has remained a customer as long as, since I left Safelite in, 2004. It's been a while now.
Wow.
And so it's, hey, those relationships and just having honest and open conversations about what's a win-win for both sides.
Now, tax practice at Clarus. I don't want to skip over the tax practice too quickly to get to Clarus, but in terms of the tax practice, is it still a going concern? And then you also have Clarus, or did you do the tax practice and fully transition to Clarus at some point?
I did fully transition to Clarus. That also happened over time. And had an opportunity to raise some capital and build some software to facilitate delivering tax credits through software. And I transitioned out of the tax practice at that point. And so I had some partners in that accounting firm that took over those accounts, and we transitioned them over time.
All right. So where did you see this opportunity for Clarus? So you see the first opportunity, you recognize that you have this honest conversation with the folks at Safelite. Hey, we support it. We'll be a client. We want to see you succeed. You start the tax practice. You're probably doing the work. And then when does the light bulb turn on that says, hey, there's a software opportunity here to help solve this problem, and it's an idea that's able to stand on its own as a business?
Yeah, so it was actually part of running the tax department at Safelite. There's a program that's one of the primary tax incentive programs in the code called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. It's there to provide, as the name suggests, work opportunities for people that have limited work skills. And we ran that program at Safelite, and it worked very, very well in the call center. But because the screening process was it was fully manual, it didn't work very well out in the field. So Safelite has locations across the country. Most of them, have 10 or 20 people in them. The call centers had 1,000 people within their four walls. It worked great at the call center, but it didn't work out in the field because the screening process was too manual. There was a change in the tax law that allowed for electronic screening, and it allowed you to accept an electronic signature as you screened your new employees for tax credit eligibility. And I thought that would solve the problem we had at Safelite out in the field for our smaller locations. And I thought if it would solve it there, it would solve it for other small and middle market businesses and make it a more viable program for smaller businesses.
I don't want to dig into that too deeply because I know we have a whole segment to talk about government and how we fund government and how we incent risk-taking, but how we also use the tax code to solve problems, right? So the issue of workforce development and how do you provide incentives to businesses to hire certain segments of society. I want to save that for segment 3.
Great.
I heard it. I want to get into it, but let's hold off on that because I think, okay, so now you have an idea, you solved the problem for Safelite. This idea probably continues to linger in your mind, right? This is an opportunity while you're running your tax practice. So when do you begin the software development process independently, right?
Yeah.
And then go out and really say, hey, here's what we're doing. We think we can raise money against this.
Well, it goes back to the question you asked earlier, what did you learn at Safelite and what did you take away? It was primarily relationships, right? And so the first place I went when I had a business idea is I went to Safelite's old CEO. I said, this is what I'm thinking about and this is why I think it might work. What do you think? And he beat it up, and we tossed it around and ultimately decided, yeah, I think that's viable.
Now let me stop you there. He beat it up. Let's talk about having thick skin as an entrepreneur and kind of loving your idea, but still being able to take constructive criticism. I've been through the process where somebody takes my idea for 614 startups through the ringer, and I'm like, I don't like this person. How do you manage that, right? When you share your idea with somebody, but I think maybe it's easier when it's somebody you respect and they've built something and you know where they're coming from. But how did that feel to you when you went to him and he's kind of beating up your idea?
Well, at the time, and I still would consider Dan a friend, so that makes it easier, right? This is what I think. And quite honestly, at the time, I wasn't sure. Dan has a great background in sales. So, hey, it's one thing to think that something is viable and will work. It's another, concept altogether, whether the market will accept what you're trying to sell to the market. And I really didn't have that background. I was primarily a tax person. So I appreciated that feedback. About, hey, I think your idea will work, but this is going to be primarily about sales and marketing.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I think that's something, just if you're taking anything away from our conversation today is just be prepared, right? If you have an idea for a business and you have trusted advisors to go to them and really listen and accept what they're saying, don't take it so personal, right? That's part of being an entrepreneur. Listen, if you can't take no from your advisors, how are you going to take no from customers, right? You have to have that thick skin because you're going to get real world feedback when you go to the marketplace. And it's better to do it with people that you trust behind the scenes so you can refine your message. All right, Brent, interesting conversation so far. I want to continue this conversation. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Excellent. Thank you.
Support for 614 Startups comes from the law firm of Dickinson Wright, with around 500 attorneys working from 19 offices across the U.S. and Canada. They handle all types of business transactional law, including advising privately held and venture capital-backed companies in capital raising, mergers and acquisition, and transactions involving technology, software, data, and e-commerce. Partner Alex Brown serves as outside counsel to startup companies ranging from business entity selection and formation, protection and commercialization of technology assets, conducting business online, and data security issues. For more information, visit dickinsonwright.com. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for continuing to be here with us. This is the 614 Startups Podcast, and I'm here with my guest, Brent Johnson of Clarus. Brent, I'm going to pick up the conversation where we left off. So you've passed the test, right, with a trusted advisor who's kind of shared their ideas, and we want to move forward. What's next for you?
Raising capital. So
now this is pre-prototype. Do you have anything to go out and raise capital with? Are we back at a napkin raising capital? Where are we?
We are working with a couple of customers without software, doing things manually. And, hey, we had the initial conversation with Dan and he beats it up and we talk about how this might work. The next step is raising capital because in order to do this at scale, it's going to require software. And building software is expensive. It costs money. And so the next step is building out a financial plan, trying to understand how much capital is required in order to be successful.
Now, are you excited? Because this is the part of the business that you love, right? Absolutely. So I can see the smile coming on your face because you're talking about the software side and you're like, oh, I got to go raise money, somebody to build it. Because you're not a technical founder, right? So you're not going to build it yourself. But man, the financial side of it, that's going to play to your strength. So let's talk about the process of building a financial plan. Because you might have had some jaws drop when you said you were going to go raise money without having a product built. A lot of the advice that's kind of floating in the Columbus ecosystem is you need to go raise money with at least something, right? A working prototype, et cetera, because we don't have a lot of pre-seed funding here.
Yeah.
So maybe we're missing something by putting an overemphasis on having a product rather than a solid financial plan that's you really thought about, and these projections are feasible. Tell us about that process for you.
Well, I guess partially I'd never worked in the startup space, so I didn't really know how to go about raising capital, and I'm certain I didn't do it traditionally, and the first process to me was how much capital is going to be required in order to get through, the first couple of years of what is likely to be negative cash flow, certainly as you build the software, and then even to continue to fund operations before you get the business to scope and size. So I did financial models that, based on assumptions that gave us a sense of how much capital was going to be required. From there, I raised capital from friends and family. It was a very close group of investors that I knew personally, and have been incredibly supportive. And so I didn't take the more traditional route of, I never pitched Rev 1 or any of the kind of more traditional ways venture capital kind of folks. It was all friends and family.
Now, who's more ruthless, friends and family or venture capitalists?
I would assume venture
Oh,
capitalists.
okay, all right. So you got a fair deal from friends and family.
I did.
Okay. All right. So you get what you need. How much runway do you give yourself with that raise?
2 years.
Okay. And this is how long ago?
This was 2013.
Okay, so this is so you've been doing this for some time now.
Yeah.
All right. So you set about, after you raise, building software.
Yes.
As a non-technical founder, you have this money. How do you get this thing built?
So I have a co-founder in this business, Teresina Maxwell, and she actually has more experience in the Work Opportunity Tax Program herself than I did. She built the framework for how it would work, and then we contracted with a software developer here locally, Buckeye Interactive, to help us build the initial prototype.
Well, so again, this is traditional advice because I always think about who's listening, right? So why did you go outside to get your initial software built versus bringing on the initial talent? Was it always the plan to go outside? What influenced that decision to not bring that in-house, the development?
Lack of expertise.
Got you.
I'm not a software person. Teresina is not a software person. And I just don't think we would have had the ability to make the right decisions.
Now, some folks go overseas to build. You decided to stay local. Let's talk about the decision. If you're going to build outside, what are some things to consider when you're contracting with somebody to build a product like this? What was your decision-making process for bringing on a outside contractor? Because somebody might be faced with that decision right now. Hey, we've raised some money. Who do we go to get this thing built?
Yeah, so I think part of that goes to, as a technical founder, or are you a technical founder, right? And neither Teresina nor I were. It mattered that we knew the person and that we had confidence in their ability to help guide us through that. I think that's harder to go overseas for. It goes back to relationships. Hey, do you know the person? And I think that's easier local than it is, overseas.
Yeah, and we have a ton of talented firms here locally. People with great reputations. I'm guessing, you kick the tires, you talk to some other companies that they might have built product for. And so there are a lot of opportunities to work with some local companies. So if you're looking and you're kind of in that space, hey, Columbus has a lot of talent here that can get it done. So you get the product built, right? Version 1.0.
Mhm.
When you go out and start talking to clients,
Mhm.
what's your value proposition to them? What's their problem? How do you solve it? And what does that look like for them?
So the first problem we had to solve was just awareness. So fundamentally what we do for customers is bring them tax credits. So we get them money, and it's on a contingent fee basis. And so the value proposition is not difficult. If we can get you tax credits for what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
that improves your economics.
Let me stop you there.
Sure.
You're the legal guy, tax law
Mhm.
person. I want us to break down some of these definitions.
Okay.
Because when you say money in taxes, it usually goes the other way.
Yes.
You're helping your clients flow money back, but most
Yes.
people are only familiar with money flowing back to them through tax refund.
Hmm.
You're using another word, right?
Yes.
Phrase, tax credit.
Credits. Hmm.
What is the definition of a tax credit?
A tax credit is fundamentally an economic incentive provided to a business or business owner for engaging in certain activities. There's really three things that drive a government to provide a tax credit or a tax incentive. One is based on employment. Second is innovation. And the third is capital investment. Employment and innovation are things that businesses do constantly. They're constantly hiring new people. They're constantly improving their products. Those are the two that we focus on. Capital investment happens in cycles and tend to be larger investments. And so we really focus on the first two.
Gotcha. Now, just to track a line through our conversation,
Mhm.
would you say of those three,
Mhm.
employment tax credit,
Mhm.
where are the biggest misses for companies you see? Are they missing out on that employment, on the capital side? Where do you see of those three categories are they the biggest misses for businesses?
Well, tax incentives have been around forever, but historically they've only large corporate taxpayers have participated in them. It's not been an arena that small and middle market businesses really had even an ability to participate in because the programs are a little complicated. And the reason that corporate taxpayers can do it is they have government relation groups, they have tax departments, they have finance groups that are aware of the programs and have the ability to put the infrastructure in to participate. Small and middle market businesses don't. And so kind of our value proposition to those businesses is, hey, we'll help you with that through software and through expertise, and frankly through sales and marketing to help them become aware of what's available to them. We'll help you participate in these programs.
All right. So I interrupted your thought. I want to kind of reset you for where you were. I just wanted to know if this was something that people were just missing in a particular category. So what it sounds like is one, there's an awareness issue.
Yes.
And that was your first challenge. You've built this software that can help people, but just even the simple definition, what is a tax credit? Am I eligible for it? Should I apply for it? What program should I apply for? There was this educational barrier.
Yes.
Right? Besides that, kind of when you went to market with this software, so you had to educate people. What else? What's the value proposition here? Once they got, the light bulb went off, how do you help them?
So we have two things that we focus on: employment and innovation. On the employment side, we screen all new hires for a business for tax credit eligibility. There's one of nine, or any one of nine category of employee can make that employer eligible for a tax credit. They tend to be folks that have limited work skills and are in danger of ending up on public assistance and costing the government money. And so this program is intended to direct job opportunities towards those people. So if you hire somebody that's coming off of public assistance, somebody that has some type of disability, a veteran who's been out of work, There's a number of different categories. So we screen all new hires for tax credit eligibility, and then we apply for those tax credits through state workforce agencies on behalf of our customers.
Okay. So it feels to me as if my eligibility follows me. Is that correct? It doesn't necessarily is a program that the employer enrolls in and then subsequent hires are automatically enrolled through the employer's eligibility. It sounds like it's on an employee by employee basis. And so the difficulty of doing that manually is that you'd like literally need somebody going into their record and checking if they're eligible and then following through the application process. What you do for them is automate that.
It's automate and identify the worker that would make them eligible for the tax credit. And so we'll put information in front of the employer that says, hey, you have two people that are applying for the same job. This one's tax credit eligible. This one is not. And you should consider, if this person has the appropriate work skills, hiring the person that's tax credit eligible, because the government's going to subsidize that labor for you through this tax credit. So we put that information back in front of our customer.
Wow. So some of this could be happening in the hiring process?
And that is where it is intended to happen. If you think about the tax policy behind this, the government is trying to influence hiring decisions and direct them towards vulnerable parts of the population that are in danger of getting on and staying on public assistance. And so they want to influence a hiring decision.
All right. And that's fair. From a government tax credit standpoint for an employer, right?
Correct.
That's like if you're making a consideration and listen, there's a subsidy available to hire one person over the other, it's fair game.
You know, we get a question periodically, is this discrimination?
Right.
And the answer is yes. It is discrimination, but it is not based on a protected class. It is not inappropriate discrimination based on age, race, sexual preference, religious background, any of those kinds of things. It is just simply, hey, this is a worker that has limited work skills and needs a job opportunity. And so that is not a protected class. And so taking that into account in a hiring decision is perfectly acceptable.
All right. Well, we cleared that up, right? In case there were some questions out there about whether or not that's something that could be done, and maybe somebody might be on the fence about exploring tax credits. Now, you mentioned that this person can be subsidized. Their labor can be subsidized, like the tax credits that you get back. It's not a check, right? Is it a discount on what you would have otherwise paid? Like it's creating a credit with the IRS so that when you file your taxes, there's a existing credit. You're not getting money back. They're subsidizing it in that way. Please explain it to me if I'm getting it all mixed up.
No, yeah, you've got it. So the way it works is once you identify somebody that's tax credit eligible, the tax credit that you earn is based on how much you pay them. It would, getting into the details would be more than you're interested in, but let's call it 40% of how much you pay that person, up to a cap, okay? And generally that cap is $2,400. So you hire somebody and the first $6,000 in wages that you pay them, if they're tax credit eligible, you get to take 40% of that, or $2,400, as a tax credit. And you get a certification from the state workforce agency that they are indeed eligible. They fall into one of these 9 categories. And then you take that $2,400 credit on your tax return. So if my tax liability was $10,000 and I got a $2,400 tax credit, I send the government $7,600.
All right. Now, this is just pure curiosity, right? Have you seen situations where an employer has structured their hiring practices so, or the mission of the company is such that they have enough tax credits to offset an entire tax bill? Or usually you're not seeing that happen?
It does happen in certain industries. Now, there are limitations on how much tax credit you can claim. It generally, in this program, it generally can only reduce your tax bill to 25% of the overall. So if your tax bill is $10,000, it can't reduce it below $2,500.
Okay.
But it can essentially take your tax bill down to 25% of what it would be otherwise. And there certainly are industries where that is the case, where they are hiring enough folks that have challenges to their ability to get into the workforce that it essentially takes their tax bill down by 75%.
Yeah, and it might be unfair to use this example, but one of the companies that immediately jumped to mind is Hot Chicken Takeover,
Yes.
right? I could imagine a lot, a majority of their employees would be eligible for something like this.
That's correct.
Would that be a fair example?
Yeah, so ex-felons are one of the 9 categories.
Right.
And I know that Hot Chicken Takeover, that's part of their hiring practices to help people that are, have criminal backgrounds or felonies in their background get into the workforce.
All right. So you go to customer number 1, you explain this to them. They take you up immediately. Yes, godsend. I've been looking forward to it. Where's the contract? I'm going to sign right here. What did you find when you actually go to market? Let's say you're already educating. People are becoming aware. What's the immediate response to this?
So, this seems to have a, kind of a thread through our conversation, but Columbus is a great hometown, right? And it's friends and family that are, that own businesses are the first people that we go and have conversations with. And the folks at Dawson were one of our very early customers. And what we learned is this has really significant economic impact in temporary staffing. And there's really not much of an awareness of how the program works. And we go from there. We start to talk to other temporary staffing firms, and we work with the folks at Fishel in the construction business. We talk to other construction businesses. And so that's how we get a foothold and kind of find out, hey, where are the industries where we can be effective and where we can help our customers, and then we develop plans around that once we've worked with our beta customers.
Yeah. So, a lot of the folks who are going to watch this are early stage companies, and they're like, yeah, it's great when I get there, when I start hiring people, when I start scaling, it makes sense. Let's talk about innovation, because that's another category, right?
It is.
That might apply to some of these earlier stage companies right out of the gate. How does tax credits apply to companies that might fall into that innovation category?
Yeah, so I said there's 3 categories, right? Employment, innovation, capital investment. Innovation is the primary tax incentive around that is the research and development tax credit. So if I'm developing a new product or service offering that is based on one of the hard sciences, that can qualify the business for a tax credit. If I'm improving one of my products or services, that can qualify for the research and development tax credit. Once again, this is a program that has historically been used by Honda and Exxon and large corporate taxpayers. There was a change in the law in 2016 which made this available to early stage startup businesses. And the change was that this tax credit was only able to be claimed against an income tax obligation. Early stage tech businesses they do a lot of research and development of product, but they don't have income tax obligations because they're not making money in their early years. So they changed the rules that allowed these businesses to take it against their payroll tax obligation, which made them viable for early stage tech businesses. And that's actually the reason we developed software to help early stage tech businesses claim the R&D credit, so that they have a mechanism to help them participate in the program now that they can actually take that tax credit and monetize it or turn it into cash.
Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being full awareness of this change in 2000s, because I feel like industry shifting, tax policy is drowned out by all the noise that happens in our society, right? Where relevant information that can have a real impact on people is buried.
Yes.
On a scale of 1 to 10, when you're talking to entrepreneurs, right? Because I'm guessing you're meeting with people, you're part of the ecosystem. 1 to 10, how many people are even aware that the research that they're doing could be eligible for some of the tax credits?
When we started the business, when we got into the research and development tax credit business, I would say it was, you know, zero. I mean, people were not aware. It was brand new. You know, today I would say that half the time people are aware that this is available to them. Maybe half the time. There's been a lot of activity. In the first couple years after they made the change, there wasn't very much activity, but in the last 2 years, there's been some significant, you know, Silicon Valley capital raises on this subject where they are going to market and they're advertising and they're spending money online to capture customers. But that's really just happened in the last year and a half. Prior to that, there wasn't a lot of awareness.
All right. Now, are these tax credits in these 3 areas, do you see any threats on the horizon? Meaning, or are they working so well? Are they delivering on the promises that were made, right? On the return on investment to the taxpayer?
Yes.
Do you see any threats on the horizon where these tax credits might go away? Is there like, hey, get it while you can, because who knows what's going to happen with the midterms? Because I know tax policy, public policy changes from administration to administration. Do you see any threats on the horizon?
3 years ago, I'd have told you yes. So as part of you know, tax reform that President Trump brought in, you know, and lowering of the rates, there was a debate around ending the work opportunity tax credit program. And so generally, you know, Republicans are lower tax rates, broader base. And generally, Democrats are higher tax rates, more niche programs, more incentive type programs. And so right now we're in a period of significant expansion in terms of tax credits and incentives. If you think about what's happened in the world in the last year and a half in COVID, gosh, you know, the government has had to get billions of dollars out to small employers to help them through this crisis. That's unprecedented. They've never done that before. Those are, I mean, the PPP program, and there's one that people are much less aware of, the Employee Retention Tax Credit, which is available to them to help with what's happened, but ability to participate and understanding of how to participate is limited. So because of what's happened, I think that these programs are getting expanded pretty significantly, and I don't see any risk of them going away anytime soon.
All right. Now, if you've been with us and you've been hanging in there and you've been listening to this conversation, I hope you're excited. I hope you're going to reach out to Brent and his team, because who knows, you might be missing out on tax credits, right? So your approach, a lot of times what holds people back is like, how much is this going to cost me just to talk to this guy to see if I'm eligible? What's your approach when folks reach out to you if they're curious to see if they qualify?
Well, we're purely a contingent fee provider. If there's nothing there, there's no fee. And so it's a matter of, you know, the old adage is the juice worth the squeeze, right? How much am I going to have to do? Is this program so administratively complicated that it's just not worth it? And I would say that the short answer right now is they are not. The dollars that are being put through these programs are so significant that it is worth your while if you think you might be eligible to chase it down and find out.
All right, let's whet some appetites here. What's the craziest number in pure cash tax credits you've seen a company be able to access? Like the biggest number in any of these programs you've ever seen or heard of?
Seen or heard of?
In any one tax year.
I mean, certainly we have customers that get millions of dollars every year. You know, I guess the largest, we worked with a hospital that got $5 million through this Employee Retention Tax Credit program. There are large, you know, taxpayers that get multiple millions of dollars,
right?
You know, measured in the tens and hundreds of millions. Most of ours are getting $50,000,
which is a lot.
Yeah,
which is a lot.
It is.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. And I think a lot of people take for granted that they. It's like for a lot of people in entrepreneurship, they disqualify themselves without even taking the first step of reaching out to someone like yourself and having a conversation, right?
Yes.
Hey, educate me more. Take a look at my business. Is there an opportunity here? Do we have the infrastructure to run a program like this, even with the automation that you're providing?
Yes.
So amazing conversation. I want to pivot in our last segment to societal issues about taxes and incentives and the programs that are working, and maybe even some industries that where we might have some opportunities, right? Like you said, it's the hard sciences right now. Should we really be looking at cybersecurity with all of the things on the horizon? How about onshoring production of medical equipment? Do we see some tax credits there coming down the line? Are there some that exist? So I'll be right back. Guys, hang in there with us. I'm here with my special guest, Brent Johnson of Clarus. We'll be right back. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Bernstein Private Wealth Management's Columbus-based team of professional advisors. In a world where most investment managers look alike, Bernstein Private Wealth Management has evolved into an organization like no other. Some money managers look to add value after a business is sold, but Bernstein delivers proactive advice right from the start. Whether you're eyeing the exit or you've just launched, Bernstein is committed to your financial success. If you're interested in partnering with Bernstein on your entrepreneurial journey, visit bernstein.com to learn more. Again, that website is bernstein.com to learn more. Bernstein, fully invested in better outcomes. Welcome back to the 614 Startups podcast. I'm continuing my conversation with my very special guest, Brent Johnson of Clarus. All right, Brent. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about societal issues. Taxes play such a big part in our lives. It is the way we pay for government, is the way we choose to address a lot of social issues. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the tax system as it is and how we're currently funding government. And then we're going to pivot to talk about incentivizing risk taking. Because as entrepreneurs, we're taking risk. And how does government look at risk taking? And what are some things that we could learn from that approach and maybe changes in the future? So wherever you'd like to start, I know that's broad. You can pick wherever you'd like to start.
Great. Well, there's been really significant change in tax policy over the last 5 years. The United States had one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, and we dropped to one of the lowest in the world through the tax changes that President Trump put in. There's a lot of debate as to, hey, did we go too low? Right? We went from 35% down to 21%. The average in the developed world is about 25, 26%, something like that. And is there a reason we need to be below that rate? And certainly the debate that's going on in Congress right now around an infrastructure bill, right? Because these two things are related, right? Is, hey, how high are your taxes? And how much of that are you going to spend on the infrastructure that supports society? And, hey, it's a debate where everybody has an opinion. And, my own is, I think the corporate tax rate went too low. I don't think it needed to go that low. And I think, where it looks like they're, if they get an infrastructure bill passed, and that's a big if still, it looks like the rate's going to be 26.5%. So more kind of normal, right? And more kind of in line with the rest of the world.
So why are those two things linked? If they pass an infrastructure bill, the tax rate is going to go to 26, projected to go to 26%. Why are those two things linked?
Budgetary issues. There's proposals out there for a $1 to $1.5 trillion package, and proposals for a $3.5 trillion package, and in both situations they're trying to make it revenue neutral. I don't know that they will be successful at that, but the higher the tax rate goes, the more revenue generated, the more it funds those programs, those social programs.
So here's the thing. I think and this is not to get political, right? But why do you think it's so hard to make decisions that seem relatively simple? Is it just an issue of like an ideological thing? Like we know maybe we went too far. Why do you think when it comes to decision making like that about making shifts to course correct, right? Why do you think it's so hard when it comes to tax policy? Is it just that making that change, it's not just the people who vote on it, it's how it's actually structured, and if you're going to 26, it's how the funds will be allocated? Because I think the issue is not just what the rate is, it's how the money is spent as well. Right? So you probably dig into the weeds of that, right? So we'll go to 26, but you can't spend it on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a tax geek.
Right.
I mean, I focus on tax policy, where that money goes and what programs that funds I have less experience with.
Okay.
But
And everybody has their pet project, right? So if we are going to go to 26, you got to give me this. Right.
It's a negotiation, and it's a complicated world, right? Hey, when our corporate rate was 35%, did it cause investments outside of the U.S.? It did.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question that drove decisions that sent money overseas. And there's no question that reducing that rate to 21% brought money back into the United States. What's the right rate? Where's an equilibrium? Because I don't know that you want money going overseas because of tax policy. There is, of course, no exact right answer, but I think most people in tax policy would say, hey, you got to be within a range, right? That is, and we were too high.
Right.
And my own opinion is that 21% was too low.
Okay. So we have to find that sweet spot. We hope to find that sweet spot, and we've elected people and trusted them to find that sweet spot. We'll see how that plays out. Now let's talk about risk taking and how the government incentivizes entrepreneurship.
Yes.
We talked about tax policy in terms of encouraging hiring in certain segments, promoting innovation and capital investments. What are some things that we haven't covered that you find is, kind of interesting and you'd like to share?
Sure. So, as part of the debate on the infrastructure package is a real philosophical difference once again between Democrats and Republicans. President Biden is looking at bringing down the rate on labor, on working people, but the offset is raising rates on capital investment. So capital gains taxes are going to likely go up if an infrastructure bill passes. President Biden's original proposal had some jaw-dropping going on because it was doubling the rate that you paid on capital gains tax.
And what's the rate right now?
20%.
And it would have gone to
39.6. And so that was his original proposal. What's in the infrastructure bill right now is taking that rate to 25%. But they're also talking about some rule changes which are getting less publicity, although you're starting to see it, where some very tax favorable treatment for early stage investments, Section 1202, which shelters capital gains from taxes at all if you're involved in an early stage investment, that may go away. That's being debated. They're talking about restricting investments coming out of IRAs that go into early stage businesses. And so, there's a number of changes, but generally, they can be categorized as lower tax on labor, higher tax on capital investment.
So now isn't okay, so we talked about the sweet spot. I think regardless of the administration, I think what they're trying to do, and you tell me if this is impossible because you understand tax policy much more than I do. Everybody fights over the rate, but we really need to focus on total collections. because you can set the rate whatever you want. That doesn't mean that you're going to collect it.
Yeah.
So how do we find, because I think that's the other, you always get one side of the argument, I feel. It's a struggle on rate, but that's a distraction. Because what the rate is doesn't mean that that's what gets collected.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to base, and the conversation we had earlier around when our corporate tax rate was 35%. Well, money went overseas because corporations were put in shared service centers in lower tax jurisdictions and paying for services in other countries. And so that reduced the base of income that stayed in the United States that the rate got applied to. And so when you're drastically above or below, the worldwide average, it facilitates funny behavior out of taxpayers.
So okay, so let's play this out just for fun. And then we'll maybe look at what's happening in Ohio. Let's take it from the national level, because that's an issue in and of itself, to what's happening in Ohio to try to attract businesses and the incentives.
Yes.
And maybe some of the craziness that happens at the city level when people are really trying to roll out the carpet for economic development reasons. So we've seen it with some trying to attract some companies, right?
Yes.
And we can talk about that. So what I'm hearing from you is that there's a little bit of whack-a-mole that happens. So let's say you adjust it up, you increase rates. Well, then, people are going to shift things around to try to bring down base. If you lower rates, you're going to bring money home, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to collect enough taxes to fund all of the things that you need to fund, whether people consider those things necessary or not. So do you think that's a problem that can be solved? Or do we just exist in a perpetual game of kick the can down the road while our budget deficits continue to explode?
That's a big question.
That's why you're here.
I mean, look, yes, I think tax policy can be better? Yes. And I think it's moving in the right direction. I think moving the corporate rate down was a good move. I think moving it back a little more to the middle is a good move. I was concerned initially when I saw President Biden's proposals on rates that they were a pretty wild swing. Where we're settling, if we get something done, and that's still a big if, is more in the middle. And you see less crazy behavior when you're in the middle.
Okay, well, let's shift to Ohio. Are there incentives for risk-taking that you see at the state level, maybe at the local level, that folks should be aware of right now?
Yeah, Ohio has become more aggressive over the years as it pertains to tax incentives. The Ohio Department of Development, Jobs Ohio, those are larger businesses that can make decisions about whether they move their operations into Ohio or Kentucky or Indiana or Washington, or those tend to be larger businesses. But there's been focus also on small business in the state with Invest Ohio program, that has had funds available to it. It periodically has money. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. There's also been a focus on reducing the rate on corporations. I mean, Ohio no longer has an income tax; it has a commercial activity tax. And they provided a pretty significant tax break for privately held businesses as well, to kind of compensate for the fact that corporations don't pay income tax in Ohio anymore. So yeah, Ohio's been progressive in terms of how it's gone about this. It still tends to be a reasonably high tax rate state, but there's been some significant improvements over the last 10 years.
Okay. Well, Brent, we can have this conversation all day, but at some point we have to wrap, and I got to give the folks my one takeaway. So thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I do want to continue this conversation with you.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed being here.
All right, folks, that was my episode with Brent Johnson of Clarus R D. I just want to say to you guys, listen, as kind of intimidating as taxes can be, it's very important for you as an entrepreneur to educate yourself and engage with advisors that can help you save money and get the funds that you need or find the funding that you need to be able to invest in your business. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Until next time, peace.